Good afternoon, everyone. And this is Dino Patti Djalal, Chairman of Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia. I want to welcome everybody for joining our discussion today. There's no question that last year, the biggest international event that the world had was COP26 in Glasgow. I think the whole country was seized on what happened in Glasgow, whether or not the delegates were able to deliver an effective climate pathway. And our own president, President Jokowi, was there also with a big delegation. So today we're going to discuss what happened at Glasgow and what next, what remains to be done, and whether or not we are on a much better path towards climate security. And to answer these questions, we have the best source, which is the president of COP26 himself, Mr. Alok Sharma, who just arrived in Indonesia, held meetings with Ibu Sri Mulyani, Pak Erlangga, with the Minister for ESDM, Pak Edwin Tasrif, and now he is honoring us with his presence. Welcome, Pak Alok. Welcome back to Jakarta. It's nice to have you back here.
Thank you, Pak Dino. It's a pleasure to be back on your program. Yes. I did promise I'd come back, and I'm back.
Yes, you're a man of your word, and I know it's a long trip all the way from London, and you stopped by and you went to Vietnam also. And,
yeah, so we spent a couple of days in Vietnam, and then here, and then back. Yeah. But I think it's been a very productive discussion, both in Vietnam and also here in Indonesia.
Yes, thank you. And I want to congratulate you for the big success of COP26. I know it was very difficult negotiations, but your leadership and your dedication made all the difference. Yeah, so thank you. Thank you. But before we start, in the tradition of FPCI, we want to read a pantun. Indonesia has a great panorama. Skies are blue with a hint of magenta. Welcome to Jakarta, Alok Sharma. Let's champion the net zero 2050 agenda. It's pretty hot in Indonesia. I'm fanning myself because I'm sweating. Thank goodness we have Alok Sharma, because he knows how to solve global warming. Okay, yeah. You have something like that in Britain?
No, but I think we might adopt this for future programs.
Most welcome. So, Pak Alok, for the general public who are watching this, can you tell us what would be the 2 or 3 biggest takeaways from Glasgow that you can share with us?
Yeah. Well, firstly, thank you for having me on, Pak Dino. And what I would say is that I think what we got over the line was actually pretty historic in terms of the Glasgow Climate Pact. And we had almost 200 countries coming together. And, you know, last year, as indeed this year, the world is a pretty fractured place. Geopolitics is very difficult. And yet we were able to get almost 200 countries to come together and agree. And remember, it just needed one country to walk away from the deal. And then the consensus would have been lost. So in terms of what I think we got over the line that was historic, of course, every country has agreed to come back again by the end of this year in terms of their 2030 emission reduction targets. There's nationally determined contributions. That's the first. We've also managed to close off the outstanding elements of the Paris rulebook. The Paris Agreement, as you know, your viewers will know, put together historic 2015, but a lot of the detailed rules were left for future COPs. And some of the most difficult and outstanding elements were still outstanding when we got to COP26. And I think there was some skepticism whether we would close these off, but we managed to do that because of the collective will. And we managed to get more finance on the table, a process in terms of delivering on loss and damage. So I think, you know, overall, what we delivered was historic. But as I've said recently at a speech in Chatham House, these are words on a page. We now need to make sure that we turn these commitments into action. And that's what this year is all about. And that's why I'm traveling again. As I said, I've just been in Vietnam and Indonesia, and I'll be doing that for the rest of this year, up until COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh.
So execution is the key word. Execution and acceleration of the pledges that were made. You know, several countries during Glasgow were against the terminology of phasing out coal. And as we all know, this was a major stumbling block in the negotiations. Can you walk us through the discussions? What went through this, and what was the outcome of these debate?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think those who are watching, we're seeing this played out live, literally in the final few hours. And as you know, China and India raised issues around some of the language. But I mean, stepping back from that, I would say that, again, as a historic first, for the first time ever in this in the COP cover decisions, we managed to get wording on coal in there, and also on fossil fuel subsidies. It had never happened before. And I remember sitting down with my team about a year ago and saying, look, we must make consigning coal power to history part of our ambition. And we did think, were we setting ourselves up for failure by doing this? But we knew this was really vitally important, and we knew that we had to get the wording on coal in. Now, of course, I would have preferred the wording as was originally put forward on phase out, but we got wording on phase down, and of course, to phase out, you need to first phase down. So I think that was historic. And last year was also another year of firsts when it comes to coal. We managed through the G7 presidency that the UK held to get all the G7 countries to agree to stop financing overseas coal projects from the end of last year. And then at the G20, the same thing happened. Again, if at the start of 2021, someone had said, we're going to get all the G20 to sign up to no more financing of coal internationally from the end of 2021, and you're going to have phase down of coal in the cover decision of a COP, I think there are very many people who would have been really skeptical, but we did manage to do that. Now, of course, as you said, this is about execution, this is delivery. My watchword this year is delivery. We now have to make sure that these commitments are being delivered on. And that's been part of my discussion, of course, on this particular trip as well, is that how do we encourage more renewables? How do we encourage that phase out of coal, phase down of coal power plants?
Yeah, what more do you expect from China with regard to coal phasing down this year? Yeah.
Well, so actually, yesterday I had a call with Xie Zhenhua, who's the climate envoy. We had a useful discussion around the need for all countries to deliver on these commitments in Glasgow. And of course, China has committed to strictly restrict the use of coal during this 5-year period and then phase it down for the next 5-year period. And they are setting out detailed policies by sector about how they're going to do this. But again, it's a question of ensuring that the commitments that China makes, the commitments that every country makes in public, are then adhered to. And I was talking about closing of the Paris Rulebook. Of course, one of the things we closed off was the chapter on transparency. So we will now know over the coming years, once this information starts to flow in, whether or not the commitments that countries are making to cut various greenhouse emissions, gas emissions, are actually being kept to.
But Alok, you mentioned that the Glasgow climate deal was a fragile win. Yeah. Can you elaborate on that? Why do you say it was fragile?
Well, so we set out, our overall goal was to keep 1.5 alive, the goal of limiting global temperature rise by the end of the century to 1.5. We know from the IPCC report that came out last August that we're already at 1.1 degrees. And you look around you, I mean, in this fine country, you see the impacts of climate change even at 1.1 degrees. You see that around the world. So our aim was to keep 1.5 alive. And what that needed was, of course, to ensure that countries came forward with net zero commitments. They came forward with their emissions reduction targets for 2030. And when we took on this role of the COP presidency, less than 30% of the global economy was covered by a net zero target. We're now at over 90%. If you just imagine, 18 of the 20 G20 nations have formally committed to net zero by the middle of the century. I mean, that is a remarkable thing. We've got 150 countries that came forward with enhanced NDCs. So if you look at some of the reports that came out, which said that if all of these commitments are delivered upon, we are heading a trajectory below 2 degrees of global warming. And that's why I said that we have managed at this COP to keep 1.5 alive, but the fragility comes from us now needing to make sure that those commitments are adhered to. So I go back to this, and I'll keep telling this around this year, is this word on delivering. That's what this year is all about, for countries to deliver.
Yeah, but even among the 18 countries out of the G20 that has made more ambitious commitment, very few have made it to a legally binding target, isn't that? And so long as it's not legally binding, then there are big questions about it. Would you agree to that?
Well, I think actually every country feels this pressure. I mean, as I said at the start of this discussion, how is it that in this very divided world, we managed to get almost 200 countries to agree to one thing, which is tackling climate change? It's because they can see the impacts of that in their own countries. Now, last year, I did 42 international visits to around 35 countries over an 8-9 month period. And everyone said to me they wanted COP26 to be a success. And the reason was because they could see for themselves the impact of a changing climate on their economies, on lives and livelihoods in their countries. So I think countries very much understand that this is something that they need to do. Now, I mean, take the case of Indonesia. Indonesia has made a commitment to net zero by 2060, possibly sooner. I hope it may come forward with an earlier.
Which we're not happy about. We want 2045.
Well, I know you are very ambitious. For your
as climate
country.
activists.
Yeah. You're very ambitious for your country, and I think that's right and proper. But one of the things that we managed to do in Glasgow, we announced, was a deal to support South Africa with a clean energy transition. And I think this is the sort of thing that we want to talk about with other countries as well. But of course, what South Africa did was put forward very ambitious 2030 emission reduction targets aligned with a 1.5 degree pathway, targets on reforming their energy sector. And clearly that has to be part of the discussion with any country which wants to get financial support from the international community.
Yeah, well, for us at FPCI, we've been calling on the Indonesian government to increase its NDC because 7 years ago, it was 29.41%, and now it's still at 29.41%. So we hope they will increase it this year. Let's talk about finance.
By the way, that's also something that in my discussions, I have made the point is that Indonesia, like every other country, signed up to look at their 2030 NDC. So I very much hope that actually we will see a more ambitious NDC coming forward from Indonesia as well.
Yes, and in order for that to come about, I think the private sector in Indonesia and the grassroots, the youth really need to be more vocal about it, right? And they are. So I think things are moving since the last time you came here, where the public opinion was just about to move, but now I think we're on second or third gear. Yeah. So well done with your efforts to raise the climate consciousness. But let's talk about finance and as we recall, developed countries did not meet the $100 billion target. And in Glasgow, you asked Canada and Germany to develop a delivery plan on the $100 billion commitment to build confidence and trust for developed countries to deliver on this. What's the update on that?
Yeah, so it was very important for me that we needed to show some movement of where we were in terms of this $100 billion. It had been something that, as you know, was first raised in 2009. And the aim was to have this delivered from 2020 onwards. The figures for 2019, which were published some months ago, showed that we were still off trajectory, under $80 billion delivered. And therefore, I think to give some confidence in the system, we were very keen as a UK presidency to make sure that there was a very clear setting out of how this money was going to come, when it was going to come. And I think both Germany and Canada, so Minister Joachim Flachsbart and Minister Jonathan Wilkinson, did a great job in putting this together. And we worked, of course, with the OECD. And I think what this shows is that the 100 billion will be delivered by 2023 at the latest. Now, that is still not being delivered by 2020, and I know there was some disappointment in that. But there were further finance commitments made at COP itself. So we'll see what we can do to drive this 2023 target to earlier, potentially this year. But what it also showed in this report is that $500 billion is likely to be delivered over that 5-year period from 2021 to 2025. And that, I think, is very positive. And I think what we need to do is continue to put pressure and ensure that we can see this trajectory to $100 billion a year continuing over the next few years. You know, we also had a commitment from the developed nations at COP that they would double the amount of money going to adaptation. And that really matters in many countries. It matters, I know, in Indonesia itself. You know, I've just been, to see the seawall, the Jakarta seawall, and seeing the impact of what has happened even over a 10-15-year period, where the seawall, you can literally see it has physically been added to. And the way it's been explained to me, that this is the reason for this is a combination of water extraction, which means that as groundwater goes out, there's a compacting of land, you have sea levels rising, again, due to climate change. And there's a triple whammy effect here as well, because the weather's getting more ferocious, so there's much more likelihood of water coming over the wall. But you can just, I mean, I was amazed watching this, seeing this, the different levels of every few years when the seawall had to be built higher. So adaptation has been really important as well. So I hope this year we can see what more we can do in terms of pushing forward on the delivery plan that we've put forward.
Yeah, well, you know, the geopolitical heat is rising. You know, we see what's happening in Europe with Ukraine and Russia, and the tension on the Taiwan Strait. It seems that to some countries, they're going to be spending a lot more on military budget. I mean, the US budget alone is over $700 billion. And the climate finance commitment is, what is it, 11 or 12? Yeah. You know, I'm just wondering, are you worried about this, that at a time when there's more geopolitical tension, more money will be spent on arms rather than on the real climate needs around the world?
Well, look, I mean, I've argued, and I will continue to argue, that actually climate change is potentially the biggest security risk we face in the world right now. You know, whether it's to do with water shortages, or whether it's to do with crop degradation, or whether it's to do with forced migration. I mean, all of this has an impact in terms of physical security, in terms of individuals and countries. It also has an impact in terms of lives and livelihoods. But whilst the $100 billion figure, of course, is totemic, I mean, I think we know that actually that is not going to be enough. What it needs is trillions of dollars a year going into ensuring that we are tackling both mitigation as well as adaptation impacts of climate change. And I was very encouraged at COP26 because we had, through a program called the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, $130 trillion of private sector money coming together, pledging to go to net zero by 2050. You know, if someone had said again a few years ago that we would have all this money coming together, people would be very skeptical. But actually, the private sector has risen to the challenge. They can see that this matters because you know, their customers, their clients are calling for this, for them to show a commitment to tackling climate change. But also, it's good for the bottom line, right? I mean, the cost of inaction is going to be a lot more in the future, and you see companies that a few years ago wouldn't have been focusing on this are very much focusing on this. And I think what we now have to do is to ensure that that money that has signed up to net zero is channeled into climate resilient projects in developing countries.
Yeah, you know, I cannot even imagine what $130 trillion look like. You know, maybe if it's $100 bills, it will stack up through the roof, right?
It's a very tall wall of money.
Absolutely, absolutely. Indonesia is now the G20 president, and concurrently with the Egyptian chairmanship of COP27. And you said earlier that if all G20 countries adopt ambitious climate reduction targets that are aligned to the 1.5, then we can reach 1.7 degree rise. What is your assessment of what Indonesia G20 presidency can realistically do to help push the momentum?
Well, the G20 set of countries is, of course, vital to tackling climate change. I mean, they represent 80%, around 80% of global emissions. So what the G20 does absolutely matters. Last year, the UK held the presidency of the G7. Italy had the presidency of the G20. They were also our partners on COP26. And so we were able to work in a rhythm throughout the year where we were able to push for commitments at the G7, at the G20, and then culminating in COP26 itself. And there was a green thread on climate action running through all of these meetings. And so I think there's a historic opportunity for Indonesia, which is in this great leadership position, to push forward on the commitments that were made at Glasgow as part of the strand on the discussion on climate and environment and energy taking place at the G20. And that's a message that I have delivered to ministers here as well. I think they've been incredibly receptive to that discussion. And as I said, you know, Indonesia could be the country that presides over a historic outcome, which is a net zero G20. As I said, 18 of the 20 have already committed to net zero formally. There are just 2 left. So I think there is a real opportunity. And I've said that I want to work with the Indonesian presidency of the G20, together with the UK's presidency of the COP26, to ensure that we're pushing on issues such as getting all countries to come back by the end of this year on their 2030 emission reduction targets, and of course finance as well, to ensure that developed nations are stepping forward when it comes to the issues on finance.
Yeah, well, Alok, I mentioned earlier that geopolitically the world is becoming more fractured and more rivalries and competition. From your observation, do you see that despite all that, the G20 can be one of the places where the major powers can actually work together, rather than in other geostrategic areas they're battling off? Yeah, can that happen in the G20 in a very effective way?
Yeah. So I mean, what I'd say to you is that, and I think everyone who's studied this recognizes it, is that climate change doesn't respect borders.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, what happens in one part of the world will eventually affect you in another part of the world as a result of the changing climate. So yes, I mean, the G20 absolutely has an opportunity to show leadership here. And I'm encouraged, based on the discussions I've had over the past couple of years with countries, is that we are able to have a discussion on climate, which is something we can agree on taking action. And there are, of course, other areas, as you said, where the world continues to be very fractured. And in some ways, the geopolitics, I think, has probably worsened during this year.
Yes. Alok, the Glasgow Climate Pact requests the parties to come back with more ambitious targets. What would you say to countries that will have no appetite to produce higher emission reduction targets? Yeah, and of course that will happen. Yeah.
Well, I mean, what I would say is, first, of course, remind them that we all signed up collectively just 3 months ago to come back by the end of 2022 and look again at our 2030 emission reduction targets as necessary. And I think different countries are in different phases. So there are some countries, some large countries, which put forward ambitious 2030 emission reduction targets at COP. They need to now formally submit those to the United Nations, the UNFCCC, for processing. There are countries that set out ambitious plans in terms of changes in different sectors, right? There were commitments made on coal, on forestry, on clean cars. Those need to be reflected in countries' NDCs. There are other countries where the NDC is already aligned to the Paris temperature goal, but we need to see more delivery. We need to see more detail of those policies. And then, of course, finally, there are a set of countries which have not shown ambition so far. And that's what this year is about, is encouraging them to come forward. As you said, as part of the discussion, is that we can't force anyone to do this. But I think countries have understood that it is in their self-interest and therefore our collective self-interest to ensure that they do show ambition and come forward. And like I say, that's what this year is going to be all about for me.
Yeah. By the way, before we take just some quick questions from public, when you had your meeting with our ministers, especially Sri Mulyani, was there a point made that, hey, we know climate change is serious, we're having this problem too, but we need the money for COVID-19 rebound at the moment, which is more urgent? I imagine a lot of countries will make the same point. Yeah, but was that?
Yeah. So I've not finished all my meetings with ministers. I've had a number of meetings, but certainly the discussion we have had is that, and I think it's a perfectly legitimate discussion, that if we want developing nations to fully deliver on their commitments, they do need support financially. And I go back to the point I raised about Indonesia, where South Africa rather, where we have collectively put forward $8.5 billion to support them as part of their energy transition from coal. But the quid pro quo, if I can put it like that, to that has been that South Africa has stepped forward with ambitious plans to cut emissions, with plans to reform its energy sector. And I think for any country, Indonesia, for example, that wants that support, the same thing will have to happen. We are very open to having a discussion with Indonesia as developed nations coming together to support Indonesia as part of its energy transition as well. And that, of course, is an ongoing discussion that we will continue to have over the next few weeks and months.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's take a few questions. Can we've invited some video questions from the general public. Okay.
Hello, Mr. Sharma. I am Sania Azza from University of Diponegoro in Indonesia. I want to ask you, Joe Biden promised net zero greenhouse gas emission by 2050, which means he will be 110 years old when he have to check on how his policy did. Unlike other policies, climate change policy is cumulative as the longer we wait. The bigger the problem it becomes, there are associated costs: money, health, life, and natural losses. Do you think the long-term policy of addressing climate issue is the only way and worth passing? Thank you.
Yeah, so I think the point that was being made is that there is a cost to all of these policies, but we've seen in international report after international report that actually the cost of not taking action on this now is going to be a lot greater if we have to wait some years down the line to take action. And the argument that I make, and this is something that is backed up by businesses, is that if we tackle climate change now, we not only have an environmental dividend coming through because we have clean air, it's good for our environment, it's good for our communities and our people, but you also have an economic dividend as well. The creation of new jobs in clean economies, export opportunities for countries. And finally, for me, the third dividend here is the electoral dividend. And I don't mean that in the sense of individual parties' politics, but I mean in terms of what you referred to earlier, which is that people around the world, civil society, young people are calling for change. And I think that's why it's incumbent on governments to act now and ensure that they deliver this environmental, economic, and electoral dividend.
Yeah, I agree. And I feel that it's not being appreciated enough that what is important is the next 10 years, right? Because that defines what happens until 2050 and so on. Yeah. We have a question from somebody much younger.
Hello, my name is Misha Mulyono. I'm 8 years old. My school in SD Santa Ursula BSD. Welcome, sir, to Jakarta. I want to ask you, how can young kids like me to fight the climate change? And what can me and my friends do to help save the world? Thank you.
Well, that's, with respect, that's the best question I've had in this discussion.
I agree.
Look, I think Michelle sort of hit the nail on the head, which is that this is about her generation and generations to come afterwards. I've got two daughters who are in the early 20s, and it's the same discussion with them. They want to know that their future is going to be secure. As part of this COP process, we set up a civil society and youth advisory group. So we had young people coming, advising us, giving us their views on how they wanted the direction of COP26 to go. And I hope people feel that that was a useful thing to happen. And in all of my international travel, I've always tried to ensure where possible, I meet with civil society, I meet with young people, and I encourage them to be vocal, to hold their governments to account, There are different countries with different systems of government, but nevertheless, there is a way in every country to express your view. And of course, you do that respectfully, but it is possible to express your view. And exactly as you said, I think if young people and civil society continue to be vocal on this issue, then you will find that governments have to listen. So I just say to Michelle, keep raising the issue, Michelle.
Yes, I can say that a big phenomenon in Indonesia now is people are against throwing plastics. Like it's a national phenomenon now. They don't use even plastic straw in restaurants everywhere. And it's all started by a 14-year-old who campaigned against plastics. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Right? She's become a national, a national sensation. Yeah. So, Pak Alok, I want to say thank you so much for visiting us again. I hope next time you come here, you don't have to do so much work. You can go to Bali and take 2 weeks off and enjoy the country. But I really want to thank you for your dedication. And, it's people like you that make us hopeful. And my kids, by the way, want to say thank you for your efforts to protect their future. I wish you all the best. And for the COP27 in Egypt, we hope to see a more ambitious results by countries who will be attending there. So thank you again. And
Pak Dino, thank you very much. And thank you for everything you and your organization do. I mean, I know that we have international friends in common who speak incredibly highly of all the work that you are doing. So please keep up the work, and thank you again for having me on your program.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. There we have our discussion with Alok Sharma. But before we close, I would like to close with a pantun again. Right? Breakfast with a slice of bread and butter. Simple course made by my beloved wife. If all countries work together, we can keep 1.5 degrees alive. Fighting climate change should have no dilemma. We need to move together like an orchestra. Thanks for spending time with us, Mr. Sharma. With this, we bid you sayonara. Off?
Great.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks.